my salvation. Amen. Today we hear of the two fishes and 5 loaves. It's a story that we have heard throughout our childhood, and many of us have different understandings of the text. Often we go to reach into our story and we talk about the miracle of Jesus taking 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and it actually miraculously came together and he fed 5,000 people. That's one rendering of this gospel text. Another one is that a boy brings 2 fish and 5 loaves. Now, we didn't hear about the boy today, did we? We find the boy actually appears in the Gospel of John. That this story takes place in all 4 Gospels. This shows its prominence in the early Christian faith, and that it was through the sharing by the little boy that the congregation, those who had gathered on the deserted place, shared what they had, and all were filled. Another rendering. We find that this is the understanding of the West Star Institute, those who are known as the Jesus Seminar folks. But what if I were to tell you that there was yet another way of looking at this text that is more expansive than even the people being motivated to share? Now, oftentimes when we do talk about sharing in the church, we do hide in our blankies and hope for things to happen. But today's story is something different. It is about an expansive understanding of who God is and the theology that dwells in the Gospels that changes who we are as folks. We find that just before this passage, something has happened. There is a large banquet at Herod's house, and that his daughter comes and dances for Herod in the midst of this banquet. Salome, which is the name that we get that has been passed down through the ages, Salome has danced for her father. He is well pleased and gives her anything she requests. We don't know the age of Salome. Many 16-year-olds would be asking for a Ferrari or a Mustang or a Lotus, or many of you get the idea of what a 16-year-old might ask for. She doesn't know what to ask for, so she consults her mother, and she says, "Bring me John the Baptist's head on a platter." This is the things that we hear of in the Bible that are grotesque. These are the politics of Herod and the first century. John the Baptist spoke out against Herod's indulgent ways, how he killed his brother to marry his brother's wife, and his wife had had enough. John the Baptist was killed for his prophetic witness. We find that when the people in the city of Jerusalem and Galilee began to hear of John's death, perhaps they were moved by grief. It was this grief that moved them out to seek Jesus. It was in their grief that they went into a deserted place and gathered for what we might liken to a candlelit vigil. They came together to remember John, the one who would lead them into a new era. With the absence of John in their midst, they came to Jesus and listened to what he had to say. Words of encouragement, words that would heal, words that would bring life. Now, oftentimes when you go to a memorial or a funeral service, what happens after the service? There's a meal. There is a large banquet meal, and at this meal, we find that there is some lack in the meal. We find that there are only 5 loaves and 2 fish. To feed 5,000 people and their wives and their children, we find that it was a time of mourning that came together through despair. Jesus begins to provide food that would enable sustenance and healing. It was something that was totally different than the banquet of Herod. It was a banquet that came together to remember the life of John and remember the call that people had to love and live and to move forward. With the people that grouped together of 5,000 men, what did Jesus have on hand at that point? He had the real possibility of raising an army. He had an army that he could overthrow the Romans and Herod, that there could be retribution put in place. But instead of retribution, there was distribution. Distribution of food, distribution of healing, distribution of understanding what it means to be followers of God. You know, the disciples that were there on that day, they learned about what receiving was all about. They realized what it was to be a follower of God, of giving out of what they had. The story of Herod is about being afraid, about not trusting, about not knowing what's going to happen amidst the abundance. In Jesus, we find a story of hope in the midst of scarcity. That we find that there are ways of learning and growing. You know that the human complex, what it means to be human is that we learn our whole lives long. It's not something that happens just once. That we are constantly learning, we are constantly adapting, we are constantly drawn to understanding a deeper understanding of who we are as a species and what that species' role is in our community. As we delve into our understanding, I'd like to offer you a quote from Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead was an anthropologist who did much research into what it means to be historically human and how that understanding of what it means to be human, what it happens as we gather together in groups. Never doubt, she says, that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only one thing that ever has. It is through a group of thoughtful, gathered around Jesus, that heard his stories, that listened to the parables, that saw the way that he healed and changed lives, has been able to change the world. It is through that understanding that we as a people continue to grow through the lessons that were taught by Jesus and the disciples, by the pastors and Sunday school teachers of our youth. If the future is to remain open and free, we need people who can tolerate the unknown, who will not need the support of completely worked out systems or traditional blueprints from the past. Jesus was such a person that broke the traditional blueprints, that he offered meal that was holy and changed lives. You may not know this, but the original understanding of a holy meal that we gathered around in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries was not of bread and wine. That archaeologists have discovered mosaic tiles in homes, and they show 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Those 5 loaves and 2 fishes represents that God offers change. That God offers us community, and in that community we find sustenance, we find what can change lives. This week I ask you to think about ways in which you can gather as a group of people centered into the life-changing gospel. One that seems that there is abundance in the midst of scarcity. Let us live lives that are abundantly clear that we are following the Christ, that we know that there are injustices in the world, and we will stand up against such injustice.